Today I want to talk about 5 different things that might be going on when you feel like you're doing more than your teammates. And this might apply to generally any kind of project. Obviously, I mostly work with people on game development. This is a pattern I've seen occur over truly hundreds and hundreds of projects over the years between Game Creation Society, between VG Dev, Carnegie Mellon and Georgia Tech, between Home Team Game Dev, the version that I now do online. Also, this semester, I am covering a couple other classes in Northeastern. And in part, what I'm realizing is that, so normally, right, I have these kind of conversations with people one-on-one as these pop up in our staggered schedules. When it's happening in a semester, a number of teams are simultaneously having this question surface about, I feel like I'm doing more than my teammates. What's going on there? And so I want to navigate again 5 different things going on, let's say 5.5, because sometimes there is something to be done. Sometimes, though, it's just recognizing that there's other ways to look at what's going on. So first of all, you got to acknowledge it is totally the case. One person may be doing more than other people. 100%. Some weeks that's going to happen. The thing to keep in mind here, though, is that partly in a situation where people can self-manage their own tasks. And this is part of why it happens the way that I teach game development. But again, for a lot of people, they're coming from classes where everyone's assigned identical work with a certain amount of time frame to do it in. And the measure of success is also in the same kind of category channel of they're all engineers in an engineering class. They're all artists in an art class. They're all writers in a writing class or something. When you have different types of work, as we do in game development, each happening in a shared context, well, some people, it just takes them a little getting used to how the work patterns and rhythms of others look different than our own disciplines. And so part of it also can happen here is that some students may be struggling into that space about navigating for themselves that level of freedom, which is different than a lot of classes. In other cases, it's a situation where we are so used to comparing our work one-to-one with others, we don't see that happening the same way. The type of work may happen in fits and spurts that are different depending on an artist, a programmer, a level designer, and other things like that. Secondarily, another thing to consider is that who is doing more work than others may fluctuate. And so this is where early on, especially if you find yourself on the side of it feels like you're doing more work than some teammates, it can be a very frustrating experience. But somewhat's not obvious sometimes until you zoom out from that is that for certain skill areas, it may be hard for the level designer to do much level designing until level design tools at a certain level of proficiency. It may be hard for people doing background art or animation to do certain things while other parts of the engine are hung together in a certain way. And there may conversely be other parts of the work that are either easier to do early, easier to do in the middle, not as much to do until the end, etc. That it becomes useful to acknowledge that, okay, well, I may be having a particularly intense week, but if I can learn to be patient with my teammates later on in this project schedule, I may be needing them to be patient with me. And that may also be because, again, there's just less for me to do during that phase. It may also sometimes take the form of just outside life stuff going on. Any given one of us is a person with a life of other work, other obligations, other stressors, other health things going on. And so to realize then sort of managing those, when we're one person, we see our ups and downs. And obviously we see the reality. We have that context for ourselves. When there's a team of us, it's impossible in many cases. Often people want to forefront this. People don't want to sit there trying to make excuses. But it's also just the reality of as time passes over a span of months for a longer project, not just some game jam where you're kind of camped away for a weekend, there will be ups and downs in our rhythms. And to be cautious of, okay, well, some weeks I may be doing more, other weeks I may be doing less, and realizing that still collectively, the only way this thing's going to come together is that we find a way to be patient with each other as we navigate our creative and technical workloads and how we navigate that stuff through our ups and our downs that are going to naturally happen. Now, the third thing I want to mention, and I like this one because this took me a long time to catch up on for whatever reason, until I think maybe I was on the other side of it. But the gist of this is that there are types of work and that can really meaningfully contribute to an outcome of a project that either may not take as long, just in terms of sheer hours, may reflect a certain amount of outside previous experience in a way that still helps the end result but doesn't quantify in the same way, may require a bunch of sort of behind the scenes work you don't really see or have visibility on, but still punch through one time, and I'll talk to a couple examples in a second, or just other kind of ways that there are skills that contribute to a team that aren't as obvious and aren't as trackable and aren't as measurable one-to-one as perhaps lines of code written, art assets checked into a repository, that kind of thing. And, I don't know you in your context. I'm not saying this is the case there. Saying this is a thing that I've seen now happen on a bunch of different nonprofit boards, school advisory committees, professional organizations, game studios, etc. Where, okay, just as an example, right? So sometimes for musicians, sometimes for animators, they might be doing a lot of other work that you don't necessarily see the work in progress until it comes through. And then when it does, fundamentally shapes and affects people's perception of the thing afterwards. Level designers may, in some cases, not have a ton to do until later on in the process, but they may define a few key areas that are really memorable, that really help shift that experience for players or people who write story. Sometimes in the same kind of way as some people doing sound effects might wait until there's animations to do sounds that fit, or VFX may wait until there's animations to kind of match those two. Similarly, in some cases, and writers, and this is not just me talking about student teams, professional writer for Spider-Man some years ago was on our podcast talking about how he knows that it's easier for him to adjust some writing words as much as he doesn't like to, and it's still work. It might be easier for him to adjust that than whole content pipelines about what areas got built and so on. So he's often having to kind of go back and kind of rework some stuff based on what else is happening in the project. Ooh, quick interjection, Eric. I should have mentioned at the moment. On the other side to this, let's say you have a skill area that you think like, okay, it's hard for me to do writing until later in a project because I need certain things figured out yet. One easy thing I suggest, because it gives you a way to be involved and still kind of get on the same page with people sitting around later, is approach work in a way that you know it's throwaway. You know you're not keeping it. Don't get lost in the details. Don't revise. This got applied for level design. I've done this for big projects that came out pretty well. Just roughing out some stuff, some thoughts off the top of your head and crude outline, whatever it takes, to then surface and discuss with the team about how is or isn't this what you have in mind or where you see things going. That can help you sooner rather than later start kind of meeting in the middle of them realizing what you're thinking about, giving feedback on thoughts to help steer you in a way that's in better alignment. Overall, you wind up in a much better place than if you really wait until you can actually drop in usable stuff. It's great if you start doing some sketches sooner and later, start again having that as a dialogue. As long as you treat those as sketches, don't put in a ton of work so you won't feel upset when ultimately the first stuff you came up with had to be completely discarded. I made a bunch of levels for process for games that never showed up in the final product, but helped move our dialogue forward in a way that improved the final results. Anyway, sorry for the interjection. Back to the main recording. That work, that talent, that energy, that focus, that specialization can still contribute massively to the framing, to the memory, to the lore, to how we think about these games, and realize that those still help the thing fundamentally happen. And even those are still in the game. And I say that because this is also a potential in a profitable, functioning business, right? Solidly half the game studio, honestly, depending on size of the company, other kind of dynamics, might not be even doing things that are necessarily in the game, but are still important to the process. And so this is where you hear it, and people call them soft skills. There's frustrations about why you call it that. It's harder to measure in the same precise way as lines of code, art assets, sound effects, and so on. But the soft skills in the sense of they're helping untangle conflicts on the team. They're helping each other feel appreciated. They're helping present the work constructively. It helps keep the vision on track. They're, in some cases, honestly, one of the other things I've seen where, oh gosh, it was one of these things. I'm going to be too specific. I'm going to, sound like I'm bad-mouthing anybody. But again, I'm trying to say this is a good thing. They were much less available to be present at our weekly meetings for one of these situations. And it was very frustrating for dev members. We're like, why aren't they here? They're not pulling their weight. Why aren't they in these meetings? And we have to be in these meetings. But the thing was, this person really, their focus was on establishing, maintaining, and then forming relationships constructively with outside contacts that were then able to introduce them in useful ways to engage with our group. And I went too specific here in the details, that without them, great things wouldn't have happened. And I've seen things that could have been great that didn't happen because nobody really had that lens on, hey, what the heck's happening off of our team and how do we manage those? And those are going to apply to a student project kind of situation. I'm only here referring to the fact there's different ways we bring value to a project. Someone's background who can be a factor in this. I think as I got more experience in having made games for decades, I'd be on a project in a very, very short capacity, make a high impact change to it. Now, I'm often trying to hide in the shadows. I don't want anyone to think that these are games I'm mainly making, but I can have a high impact fix because of my experience level. And again, not to say I'm one-to-one with this person, but just because it's easier to think about an example you might be familiar with. If you take an incredible world-class composer like John Williams and have him drop in and do the soundtrack on a game, how many hours does it take him? I don't know. I'm not trying to trivialize his work, but I think from his experience level, he probably can achieve staggering, fascinating results in time proportionate to what it would take me to do a soundtrack, which would be way worse. But it's not just about the hours pushed in there. It's partly also a reflection of the outside, their expertise, practice, how they're leveraging their gifts and their talents. Now, the other side to this, too, is that, and so I'm up to point 4 now, there are many parts of the game development process, and this is probably true for other things, game development, which is the ocean that I swim in, right? There's a lot of other work in game development that may be next to invisible. Could be a ton of work. And sometimes it's very technical. Sometimes it's actually art side, but sort of behind the scenes rigging kind of work. Details about texture alignment. In the case of programming, might have to do with sounds, getting hooked at certain events, might be keeping servers running, might be scalability of architecture. It's all these other things that they're a part of doing the process well and correctly. And honestly, part of the frustrating thing can be when you get it all done right, no one can even tell you did it, because that's how you know it's done right, that it's seamless, that it's not a distraction, that there's not a performance hiccup when you're walking from one big streamed area to another. It can be a ton of work. And so one of the challenges on teams that are, again, cross-functional disciplines, focus, lenses, and so on, is someone who's consistently chipping in art assets or code of different kinds that are more visible to the gameplay on the UI, for example. If I added this widget and that widget and this widget, what did you do? I kept the servers running. Is a very real answer that could be a tremendous technical hurdle that all the player notices that the game doesn't disconnect randomly in a multiplayer experience, but that's still a substantial amount of work. And again, this is just generalities, things I've seen across a number of different teams, not speaking to any specific project here in this case. And then 5, I want to mention too, and this is especially important for something I do in home team, but it's a challenge too. I know students navigate to in a school context, is that just because one person is doing more work, right, they may have their own reasons. They may have a lighter course load. They may have a more flexibility in their time outside between group meetings or between times they're doing reporting stuff. It may also be that this project better aligns to their creative interests, to their professional goals, to the things that they find satisfying and rewarding, that to them it's a relief, or it recharges their battery instead of draining it creatively. Just we're all wired in different ways. And so one thing to realize, just because that person's really able and willing to throw themselves into it, does not automatically from that follow that everyone else has to keep up with that. Does that make sense? That's not how that can be. That everyone else is not necessarily in that situation. If the person wants to put more in, they can, unless, and this is the thing that's got to be careful about this, because I had a family member who this was a challenge for a lot of her life. She would put in a lot on something and then be frustrated because everybody else didn't put in an equal amount. But I would always try to explain, like, at least in my perspective, well, if you would be resentful if others don't reciprocate it, then that's on you to manage the level at which you're comfortable pushing in on something, knowing full well, again, just because I'm doing more, I mean they can either. And this is honestly part of why this is so important to recognize, is that there was this thing, it was a early instructive teaching moment for me early in my career, where I was fresh out of college. I had nothing but time. I had nothing to go home to. Honestly, no outside life besides my work or my job. Damn, it's sadder when I say it out loud, isn't it? Anyway, so it was a case where, we had a demo coming up internally, going to be on a big old screen for the whole studio, so it's kind of wanting to impress people. And I would just kind of stay in and try to help fit in some additional stuff to have more cool things to show in the demo, until one of the more senior people, thankfully, helped me understand that one of the causes for crunch as a notoriously problem in the game industry, and I'm sure in other fields are affected, it's just the one that I can speak to, is honestly, it evolves from these things where someone who is willing, able, and in a life situation to put in more, energy-wise, health-wise, whatever other factors are going on for them, able to put in more, what winds up happening is inadvertently, that can have ripple effects, creating more work for others. So like in my case, I was a level designer. I would check in some more scenarios and events and demonstrations of stuff happening in the scene. Well, now to make that appropriate for the rest of the team to show, other people now feel like they have to fit in additional sound effects or animations or other things and writing to support those pieces. They didn't want to show them in kind of the rough draft, strung together a placeholder kind of version. So it's creating more work for others. And so that's where sometimes it can even seem like, well, it's okay if someone just wants to or has the energy to. Even there can be helpful to kind of pay attention to being mindful of, are there ripple effects on others? And in what way do I need to even pace myself a little bit for, if I have more energy and time, and say just hypothetically write a game where I could produce 300 models, but gosh, we don't have the pipeline to implement and program all that stuff. Well, it still might be the case for, how many models could I do that makes sense to the pace at which this team's able to, focus on this project, and then spend that energy in other ways that are more perhaps not part of this project, on my own, outside of it, to part of this practice of navigating the free form, the level of flexibility we have to be able to define our own tasks, is that the same lens, if I can look at a project, we're all doing completely different work in different ways, measured on different axes, deciding for ourselves when it's done, is that same lens of I can look at where there's nothing been assigned to me, but I can make up a thing and assign it to myself and then do it. That is a deep, fundamental, reusable life skill. Zooming further above that to bird's eye is hopefully the version of I can spot a project that no one's assigned me, and I can create a meaningful thing there by going and doing something with it. But again, it's recognized, just because I have overflow doesn't mean I necessarily have to go into this one thing. This may not be the place for it, but even if I do, it does not automatically follow everyone else has to keep up with however many hours I'm able to throw into it. It's not how that works. Just because you are doing more does not automatically necessitate others have to keep up with that. And if you would be uncomfortable with the amount that you're doing, if they don't keep up with it, then that is up to you to learn how to manage and practice, which is just also a version of still to dial us all back to navigating this thing about the freedom and flexibility. We're all doing different work. We're all self-assigning tasks. We're all coming up with original, different stuff that we're doing. The complexity that comes with this is the skill we're working on. Just like there's skills in programming, there's skills in design, there's skills in art and audio and all these other things. There's too many to list, right? I'm going to leave things off. QA testing, all this stuff is skills that have to be learned and practiced and people get professional proficiency in. Part of this also skill is figure out how to navigate these more nebulous freeform things. And as long as you're learning and getting practice at that, when there's these wrinkles that arise, to not feel like it's catastrophic or panic or something's going terribly wrong or whatever, but to realize like this is the learning process. There's an opportunity here for us to try to hone in together to realize that maybe you are doing work and I'm just not seeing it because we both aren't reporting to each other. Or is there some other structure we want to add internally to help us better log and document because it helps us kind of better maintain a level of trust and pure accountability we all feel better about. But untangling those together is fundamentally the learning going on here above and beyond. The games are an artifact that's a result of that learning. I hate to put it this way, the games kind of aren't the point, right? It is these life skills that will serve us for the rest of our time. And I said 5.5 because I will also acknowledge out of these things where I was like, okay, well, there's still some reasonable guardrails, right? So just to say it shouldn't be 0 hours per week. That's probably not good. Or if it is, well, then it's better that they can acknowledge that and then work on trying to constructively move it up to 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. 0 isn't good, right? That's probably a sign of a problem, but you have to begin by comfortably acknowledging the problem. A teammate shouldn't be ghosting or unreachable by others. And again, that could also be indicative of something else going on. We never know what's going on in their lives. We want to be sensitive to that, but that's a problem in a very distinctly different way than others. The teammate shouldn't be actively resisting or adding friction to the process. And again, that could also be other kind of challenges interpersonally, socially. There are still challenges we have to untangle. This is where hopefully out of the skill sets on a team, as much as you might have skills in art and audio and programming and yada yada and writing, again, same list as the others, level design, whatever. It can certainly be beneficial to have one or more skill people on the team who part of their skill points in life they've stacked them into are helping to figure out how to communicate constructively and patiently and empathetically and understanding someone's concerns and how to get them back on the same page so that the whole team can thrive. To not discount, that is a real skill that doesn't necessarily show up in the GitHub repo, but without it there, stuff falls off the rails all the time. Anyway, I hope it's been helpful for somebody out there and thinking about you're on a team, you're feeling frustration, making sense of different lenses to take to that, to hold to that. And again, obviously your experience may be different. I don't know your situation. These are all just things to be thinking about when you're encountering the situations. And then part of what I have structurally, like, so for example, in my class, in case some other instructors listening to this trying to figure out how do you make something like this work in a college setting where it's got still got to grade people and whatever, and it's fine if they're doing nothing, whatever. Basically, I have self-reporting built into the system. Every single week, students are reporting what have they done, how many hours they put in on X, Y, and Z versus what they thought they were going to do. So it helps me have some behind-the-scenes information. Every single week, they're presenting updates in class about kind of a show and tell, and that's a different side of helping make sure they're practicing getting forefronting what they're doing. And again, if it's not much, well, then at least they're talking through that process and they can't be in denial to themselves about, I didn't have much to show. Okay, well, I can calibrate off of that, but I'm getting practice showing that. And then scattered throughout my semesters, I also have team evaluations. That was something I obviously borrowed that from a syllabus, another instructor already in the institution, but scattered throughout the semester a few times, teammates are evaluating how they think they're doing, how they think their teammates are doing, which is essential to help triangulate. Because again, sometimes what's often happening is that I've seen situations where out of 4 people, each thought they were doing the most work. And as silly as that sounds, it's partly because we see things through our own lens of what work looks like, of the work that we respect, of the work that we understand how to parse. And it's even probably some version of this classic problem of relationships, spouses or significant others, where if they ask each person what percentage of the housework they do or what percentage of the childcare they do or whatever, if you add up the percentages, it's always like 150% or more. Because both people only see the things that they do and necessarily don't see the things that other people do. That same effect absolutely applies in all kinds of other team settings where if we're not careful, as a programmer, I see a lot of the programming. I don't see so much of what's happening for sound or heck, other programming that I'm not having my hands in. Anyway, hope it's been helpful for some of y'all out there. Again, be kind to each other, be patient with each other, be kind and patient with yourselves. Hopefully this is, useful. Anyway, I'll catch y'all another time. Thanks for tuning in, following along. If you got other experiences about working teams, especially positives, especially ones where Baton's just someone was bad. Okay, well, it's a different thing to diagnose and treat. I'm curious to hear your thoughts in the comments, but that's all for now. Catch you today. See ya.